Um, Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Dirks. This is my reflection video over the e-portfolio for my practicum course. I want to first say thank you for allowing me the extension and apologize that I even needed it. This is being recorded on Zoom because my home computer would not let me do Screencastify, and my school computer would not let me screen grab on Screencastify. So we're doing Zoom, but I can still upload it to YouTube. I'm going to first spend time focusing on my e-portfolio, and specifically the PowerPoints, the Google Slides that focused on my activities. We'll go from there. I'm going to spend time focusing on the one that I probably spent the least amount of time on, and that was my district activities. I chose these standards where in a couple of them, and I reused this one, but I also use it a different way, is that I worked on the district level to create, to align our College Board standards for AP Environmental Science with our school standards by highlighting also the ENGSS standards. So the district over here requires us to have, and our school board requires us to have, all of the standards in a specific document. We couldn't just upload the College Board document. I spent a lot of time working on this, either individually or on our own over the school year. And then from there, we also picked out textbooks and tried to align those with not only the College Board standards, but also the district standards. Another thing that I spent time working on is I attended the district diversity, equity, and inclusion group. They meet a couple times a year to focus on the just kind of the issues in our district with diversity, equity, and inclusion to ensure that all students' needs are met. They had a great conversation about social and emotional learning, which unfortunately or fortunately a lot of people equate with CRT. And so that was a long conversation about cultural, not cultures, but critical race theory, which is funny because CRT could also be culturally responsive learning or culturally responsive teaching. And so we spent a lot of time working on that. And then another activity dealing with that same meeting was speaking to the SEL initiatives in our district. And we looked at how in our classrooms we're trying to, in incorporating them into this district stuff, how we are trying to make sure that our curriculum is the focus, but also student well-being is the focus. There's one more in here that deals with, there it is. And then finally, another activity I did was one of the counselors in our feeder middle schools reached out to me, and she was wanting to present at a counselor professional learning with members of the LGBTQ community within our district, and speaking to the wants, needs, and desires of our student population, but also our staff population. So we spent time, she did most of the legwork when it created the presentation, but then we worked through and I analyzed that presentation with another member of our district staff. And then we presented and then took questions, really just supporting our school counselors, but also our students in that respect. So these 5 standards focused kind of on a different levels. I think overall, with the exception of the creating not creating, but aligning the standards for College Board for AP Environmental, a lot of what I focused on at the district level, which is what I have a passion for, is just making sure that all the needs for students are met, especially in the realm of DEI. So the next one that I did was elementary school. I followed Ashford Collins for a shadowed him for a day. And at that day, he was the only principal in the building. So he had a pretty large task, and he tried to do all of his normal things as well as his um, just all of the tasks he had to do. And he printed out a schedule for me, and we talked through it at the beginning. Kind of jump around on here. The first thing that he did was walkthroughs, and for me, this is kind of a different like level situation, especially with being in secondary. Is our school is so large. We have 1,600 students, although Valley Park is our largest elementary in the district with nearly 500 students. And so that's a lot of kids in a very small building. Um, but Mr. Collins did go through every hallway and made sure that the exit doors were closed, said hi to students and teachers as he went through. And this was just establishing his culture of being supportive and nurturing, and just the way that he interacted with, and this is towards the end of the year. So to see him interacting with teachers, you knew that this was an important practice in his day, and it established a positive culture. Another thing that he did was we had 3 different evaluations with teachers. There was just the post observation meeting. And I really appreciated that because at my secondary level, I got to do the observation. And as a teacher, obviously, I've had my pre observations and post. But what I appreciate about Mr. Collins is his intentionality. And so, what I took away from this is just when you have these meetings, the relationship is key with the teacher. But he was very observant, and it wasn't just a "you're a good teacher." He gave specifics and highlights. So I put this on here just to kind of make sure that people understood that even at the elementary level, the concept of social emotional learning and safety is important. And he had to have 2 different conversations with parents about safety. One kid at lunchtime made a comment, another student made a comment the day before, and so he had to ascertain the level of severity. He had to talk about district policies when it comes to suicidal ideations. And to think that he has to deal with that on an elementary level is pretty devastating. But I think he handled all of those situations really, really well. Going back up here, going back to, I put this one under modeling professional norms, but I also think it's just being culturally responsive. Mr. Ashford Collins spoke to how he tries to highlight monthly, like African American History Month and Women's History Month, and this was Arab Americans Month, and in May it's Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians Month, and so he goes around and reads books or has conversations with kids about these. And I really feel like the reason why I chose this is modeling professional norms, is just showing kids that, yes, I'm an administrator, and yes, sometimes I have to do discipline, but your culture and the differentiation in our building is really important and vital. And he models that to his teachers, but also to his students. That one. The discipline piece of this was one that, like, I chose this picture because that is Mr. Collins right there on a dress-up day. But his interactions with, he had to meet with Durham school bus services because of an incident and how he handled that. He also had to make sure that the legality of things and the ethics of things was above board. Conversation he had with the bus company was about, hey, this bus driver has made comments about kids of color. Is that playing into this? The child, I saw the video, the child was being disruptive and unsafe. So there's that part, that's facts. But prior to that is this bus driver going through situations where he's not being ethical. And so Mr. Collins had to deal with that. I loved his interactions with his staff. You could just tell there's a mutual respect in there. He's only been there for a year. And so just how he knows his staff and how he knows a lot of his kids was really intriguing, and I was really impressed with that. And I just think that I've known Ashford for a couple of years, and just seeing his growth as an administrator has been really cool. Um, we also went around and looked at a variety of classrooms. He let me walk through some science classrooms and some English classrooms, but probably one that I wanted to focus on is at this school. They're one of two Chinese immersion classrooms, and just being in there and seeing that focus and seeing these students speaking Chinese from kindergarten first. We were in a fourth grade class, and they were just, I mean, it was just fascinating to me. So being able to see that was great. And then finally, on the secondary level, I spent a lot of time. I highlighted Dr. Tyler Alexander as my person, but a lot of some of the stuff on here, I also worked with Dr. Edie Presley, my building principal, and Kelsey Bacalar, our associate principal. But because I spent time with Dr. Alexander, I chose him as my supervisor. But this is one I did with Dr. Presley. We created I have it right there. It's on all of our announcements. I have it on my homepage. She asked each staff member to put it on their page. She has it on all of her documentation and in her email signature. And so we worked for about a year, and during COVID, over Zoom meetings, to make this a thing and then put it into practice. So just working collaboratively with our community, but also within our building. We had the student involvement was so fascinating. It was so great. It wasn't fascinating. It was great. I know these students, and I know this is what they do. With Dr. Alexander, in two different situations, we had to deal with discipline, and both of those interactions were interesting. One was a reentry, and that's later on in my portfolio. And then one was a student who a couple different female students in that building had spoken to his inappropriate advances. And so this was like the fourth time they've had this conversation with the students. So they had to like get evidence and look at video and talk to different students. And so it was an all day interaction with him and another one of his teachers, another one of his administrators, and then the head principal. Tyler will be the head principal next year. But all that to be said, at the end of the day, they came together and they put all of their evidence together. They called district office. They made sure that everything was above board. And again, I feel like this is modeling professional norms. They tried to make sure they were fair, they were transparent, they were equitable. They weren't trying to treat him any differently. They looked at his past behavior. And so, yeah, that was an interesting interaction. And then kind of fast forwarding to the other one, the reentry, this is one of my first things that we did. We did an interview in the morning, and then we did the reentry. And so that was interesting because I thought it was just going to be a simple, hey, you screwed up. Are you feeling better? Let's go. And it ended up being a 45-minute conversation about how this child wasn't ready to be back in the building. He felt unsafe. He was making choices. The district has their guidelines. And so he could have come back to school that day, and he chose not to. And his parents were in the room, and then also our school resource officers were in the room. And so it's an interesting conversation there. I put a lot on my advisory. So there's 3 that I put on our advisory. I'm on the advisory board for our district, for our building. So me and 3 other staff members, we create weekly curriculum for our building that is under school culture, it's under inclusivity, and soft skills, essentially. So this is kind of an example of our calendar, and we sometimes separate it out based on grade level. And so sometimes it's just everyone's getting the same thing. We're all passing out schedules, or this week we're all talking about the activities fair or something to that effect. But sometimes it is like this week, the social media inventory. I had a class meeting, and so we worked together to create curriculum every week that was worthy of the time, but also meeting our needs. So this is just a couple. The master schedule, as a teacher every year in April and May, I I walk past our curriculum instructor's office, just he has the master schedule, or she had the master schedule behind her desk. This year, our head principal and Dr. Alexander had to put those together, and just, it's a puzzle, but it's also, especially in those readings that I had to do for our annotated bibliography, it's more than just like, okay, I have to make sure that this person has 5 hours and they have their plan here. I'm a head coach. They try to make sure all head coaches have 7th hour off so we don't have to get so many subs and this and that and all of these things. And just realizing the intricacies of that. In this particular meeting, we were meeting with the math department chair to talk about changes and, hey, this teacher doesn't want to teach geometry anymore. Can we do advanced algebra and stuff like that? So, and in one of the meetings, we talked about sending students to our academy, which is our non-traditional school in our district. So we have our 5 traditional and then our non-traditional. And this is one where students who just where regular schools are working out, and we have to recognize that. There's a smaller class sizes. There's only 80 students, at the most 100 in the building at any given time. So it's a much smaller student to staff ratio. And so that meeting that morning was about that. A couple highlighted students. Each high school gets a certain amount of students that they can put in the building. I participated in a couple of interviews, one really good interview and one not so good interview. And so it was interesting to kind of be part of 2 very different interactions. And then after each to hear the conversation that the administrators were having with the department chairs about their resumes and whether they were going to offer them the contract. This was one of the highlights of the day, is that Dr. Alexander and I got to go to Johnson County Community College and be there for the award ceremony for the Skills USA. Our students who are in our intensive resource, they go and they compete in counting change and setting a table and all these skills that are jobs that they're going to be doing post-secondary in a positive way. And they had a competition. So it was really great. He was literally the only administrator there at that time to be there for the awards. So that was super fun. You can watch the video about what Skills USA is. So
I would like to find,
in general, the all of my interactions and then my other hours were spent working at basketball games, interacting in meetings about staffing next year. I'm the student government sponsor, so we spent a lot of time at the end of the year dealing with graduation, especially with the changes, like from COVID this year and how we're going to do things differently. I was one of the most senior persons when it comes to planning graduation. So that's a community interaction that's highlighted. And then I participated in some of the last school day events with seniors. And then also dealing and talking with our district personnel about uses of Canvas, and which is our Blackboard type thing. So all in all, it was a really good experience. I wrote in my reflection that I thought coming in, it would just be a lot of after school activities and logging hours, and not really speaking to the impact they might have or the whys, and aligning those to the curriculum, and realizing that from my viewpoint, administrators, sometimes it's just going to basketball games and making sure kids don't do stupid things, but none of the alignment really speaks specifically to that. I mean, we could say that that's a cultural thing or an interaction thing, but all that said, it was a really good experience. I learned a lot. And again, thank you.